Good afternoon, Suidlanders. How are you? We hope that you're well. I'm thinking about doing a new thing, like a weekly roundup, as we try to do get back into doing the videos and communicating more, both with Suidlanders in South Africa and particularly, quite honestly, that's my preconception anyway, with people overseas. But for now, it's mostly South Africa. And today is talking of weekly roundup, today is the Friday the 7th of October. And this morning, I did something foolish, typical of me. I woke up early, as I usually do, not always, but usually 4 o'clock something this morning. And when I wake up, I usually get up out of bed and do a few things and then get back in bed and I'm on the phone, WhatsApps, whatever. And I usually will think to myself at first, feed the chickens, put the seed out, even if they're not out of the run yet. They'll come, they'll eat in an hour, then you don't have to do it then. Do this now, brush your teeth now, do whatever, then you don't have to do it later. Top up the dog's water, put some pellets in there, not that they eat them, the spoiled brats. And this morning, I thought to myself, take your medication, then you don't have to do it later. And so I popped a pill, quite a strong pill, and one of those pills that you feel has an effect on your body. That's the nature of the illness and the treatment. And 2 hours later, when I got out of bed proper and showered and dressed and everything, I thought to myself, don't forget to take your medicine. And I did. And taking that medicine twice is not a good idea. So I've felt quite ill almost the whole day long. And so I was going to put this video off, but I thought, don't, just do your best. If it's not that great, tough luck. So here we go. I'm going to, for the first time, experiment with something that may or may not work, but it's the world and the week. An overview, a cursory overview, not going into a great deal of depth, about all of the major things, or some of the major things that have happened over the past week. And in fact, Fridays might not be the best day for it. It might be better for me to do it on Sundays. I don't work on Saturdays. But let's see how it goes. So we're just going to wing it. I'm not feeling great. And somehow, earlier on I was feeling really bilious. And now it's somehow gotten even worse, which is weird because whatever it is now, 10 hours later, 8 hours later, I really wish it would have thought it had worn off. So I'm just going to give it a whirl. And item number 1 is the great British bond market crisis. Now, in fact, that began last week, Wednesday. Today being Friday the 7th, that would have been, I think, the 28th. So it's not part of this week's dramas, but I decided to include it because it came hot on the heels of the previous week, Wednesday, just prior to the Queen's burial, while she was being moved from one or other abbey, one of the old abbeys where there were monks, to the church of that place. She was lying in state, or whatever it's called there, to a cathedral, something like that. The United Kingdom of Great Britain defaulted on a £500 billion debt. A technical default on a huge debt. Lo and behold, about a week later, along comes this bond market crisis, and it was again, I'm explaining why I decided to include it in this week. It was such a big event that it was being commented on as if it was current. You know, like a car accident or something. An hour later, it's still, sadly, a dramatic thing. It's not a thing of the past, it's a thing of now drama. And Monday, 5 days later, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, it was still being spoken about in those terms. And over the weekend, last weekend, Saturday and Sunday, there were all sorts of related dramas to the bond market crisis. So first you have this technical default, then you have a bond market crisis, and basically what it was is that a company called BlackRock, the world's biggest company, a robber baron, evil company if ever there was one, pulled a move in the markets. It took advantage of an opportunity that it could see to make a quick buck. And the knock-on effect was that 7 of the biggest pension funds in Britain were almost destroyed, wiped out. The reason being that those pension funds are heavily invested in the bond market. Now, bonds, as you may know, are the sovereign debt of a country. Sovereign bonds are anyway. Anybody can issue a bond, like Eskom has issued bonds. But usually a bond is it's raising capital, it's raising loans from the market. So a government says we're R1 billion short this month or this year. We're going to issue a bond, and people are going to buy the bond at a certain rate, and then we will pay them back over time with interest. And it's considered a very stable investment, very reliable. Well, apparently not. These bonds' values would have dropped. It's very complicated, but the bonds' values or their returns would have dropped to the point where they would have bankrupted the holders of the bonds, those who were holding many of them. The pension funds obviously need a certain rate of return. They're paying people every month. Some guy worked for 40 years. He's been on retirement for 30 years, maybe, I don't know. And he needs his, a few thousand rand a month, a few £1,000 a month, whatever. They can't afford to be dodgy. They've got to be very reliable, very dependable. Anyway, so that was a very, very big thing, resulting in the Bank of England being forced to pay to money out of thin air into the bond market, to basically buying it up, to keep it afloat, to keep it vital, invigorated, to inspire confidence in it. They're going to inject £5 billion a day for 13 days. Right, another one to touch on very briefly, and we'll have other opportunities to go into more detail, is expropriation without compensation was pushed through 2 Wednesday nights ago, I believe, Wednesday the 28th of September. And again, this is not something from exactly this week, but I thought it was worth throwing into the mix. The implications are enormous, ladies and gentlemen, absolutely enormous. And a Suidlander has just sent me a very interesting thing. You can look it up yourself, which kind of ties in to the notion that I think that we're all getting, that globally there's some kind of coordinated conspiracy to introduce new norms, values, mores, and laws into the whole world all at the same time. So, just as everybody, all of a sudden, over the past few decades, has made divorce very easy. That's a salient example, very easy to come by. Wasn't in the past. The rights of mothers over fathers. Abortion is almost universally freely available. So much so that nobody remembers that just a short time ago it was considered abhorrent. And now LGBT, whatever you call this thing. Okay, so you can look this up. You can Google earthconstitution.world. Earthconstitution.world, as easy as that. And you can go to the Constitution and you can look at, whoops, here we go. Subsection 2 of Section D of Article 10. So Article 10, Section D, subsection 2, to read about how these global institutions are planning to implement a one world government system, and how that one little portion tells you how they will, I don't know what's a polite word in English, how they will stymie people who don't toe the line. And similarly, we now have the expropriation without compensation pushed through the parliament late at night. And I would say to you that the devil of it is in the details. Expropriation without compensation implemented at local level. In other words, if they kick it off fully, there won't be a 10 years backlog at the national department, because every municipality and district and province will be able to implement their own realization or manifestation or fulfillment of expropriation without compensation. Your local drunk mayor will be able to determine for himself what must be expropriated and to whom it must be given. This is a fact. Okay, let's carry on. The accession of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, oblasts of Ukraine, to Russia. It's a very, very big thing. An oblast is like a province, but more like a British county, roughly. And the usual translation is region. So there are these provinces that constitute Ukraine, and these guys in 2014 held a plebiscite, a vote to get the opinions of the people, a plebiscite on leaving Ukraine. This was after their elected president was kicked out in a coup that was sponsored by the CIA and the United States government State Department, the State Department being the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the United States of America. And that's a well understood thing. So, and at that time, there were moves to ban the speaking of Russian in Ukraine, many of the people of Ukraine being ethnic Russians. They weren't allowed to speak their own language, and education was not to be in Russian, and so on and so forth. These guys were fed up. They said, we want out. Vladimir Putin said to them, no, whoa, you can't just leave Ukraine and join Russia. It doesn't work that way. However, after 8 years of conflict between these ethnic Russian people and the Ukrainians, and then the intervention of Russia entering into Ukraine, invading on the 24th of February of this year. Finally, all parties, well, the Russians and the people of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson have had enough, and they're going to join as one. Now, interestingly, 3 weeks into the invasion, 3 weeks into the war, in the, what was it called? The conferences, the secret meetings that they were holding between the Russians and the Ukrainian government, they agreed, they reached agreement on how to settle the war after 3 weeks. And the agreement basically was that those regions, not all of the regions that are under question, but the main ones, would become autonomous within Ukraine. Russia would leave Ukraine, go back home, but the Ukrainians would accept those regions for what they were and stop bombing them. They've been bombing them for years. Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, flew to Ukraine when he heard this, and he in person he spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky, the head of the Ukrainian government, and said to him, don't do this, you've got to keep on fighting. Don't seek peace. Don't settle on terms that are acceptable to you. Don't reach an armistice or a truce or a peace agreement with the Russians. And so with that conspiracy, they continued. And look where we are now. Anyway, these guys on Wednesday the 5th of October, 2 days ago, after a process of about a week, voting, review, taking it to the Russian Duma, the Parliament of Russia, final signing by Vladimir Putin. Of course, it would have begun with, after the voting, the next step, I left it out, would have been submission of an application. Hey, we just voted to be we want to be, on your team. We've taken this decision. How do you feel about it? Anyway, the accession. It's not an annexation. You can feel however you like about it. But in legal terms, even if you disagree with it, the legal term is not annexation. It is accession. So they have acceded to Russia. On Thursday, the 6th of October, a huge event. OPEC Plus. OPEC Plus is OPEC, the oil producing and exporting countries organization, which is dominated by Saudi Arabia and other, let's say, Arabian players, or peri-Arabian players, peri as in peripheral players around the Arabian center, plus affiliates. So OPEC Plus is the OPEC organization centered on the Arabian Peninsula, not entirely but largely, plus non-OPEC members who are affiliated to OPEC. They took a decision that they would reduce their total production of oil by 2 million barrels a day. I can do mental arithmetic. I'm not too bad at it, but put me on the spot. This is one of my most embarrassing traits. I can remember people's names, but when I introduce people to one another, my brain freezes. I can't remember who anybody is. It's stupid. Similarly, I can do mental arithmetic, but not while I'm, on the spot. So let's try this. 2 million barrels a day. A barrel is 158.8 liters. Let's round it off to 159 liters. Times 2 would be 318. So they're reducing their output by 318 million liters a day. The reason being that the price of oil has dropped due to reduced demand, and the reduced demand is due to the global depression that we're entering, not a recession, a depression. We can talk more about that in due course. And they're not making money anymore, or not making enough for their satisfaction. There's reduced demand, so people, the price drops, demand and supply. So they want to increase the demand by reducing the amount of oil available, which will increase demand for that reduced supply. That's how it works. There's always somebody in the market who's willing to pay a little bit more because they have to. Unlike you and me, who might say, well, I have to go to work, but I don't have to go shopping on Saturday and Sunday, or Friday evening and Saturday, and I don't have to make a trip to drop the boys off for water polo and one for rugby. I'll drop them off for water polo and rugby, and the rugby boys who are there 2 hours early, well, tough luck for them. I'm making one trip there and back. But some people have to have a certain amount of petrol or fuel. So they know they're going to get their money. They're going to get more money. And this is very, very, very big. The Americans are absolutely indignant about it. But they are hypocrites. Out and out hypocrites. Unreconstructed hypocrites. Because it is this Biden administration that's in such a tiz, is the same Biden administration that bullied Olaf Scholz's new government. The elections were held in September of last year. I think the government came in sometime in November in Germany. You remember? Angela Merkel announced beforehand that she would leave office. She wouldn't contest. She wouldn't try to remain the chancellor. Elections held. The new government wins. They become the government in November. First thing the Americans do is bully Olaf Scholz and his gang, Olaf Scholz, the new chancellor, not to certify their own Nord Stream 2 pipeline for it to come online. And they're the same people who refuse to open the huge Keystone XL pipeline. Gas and fuel are not the same thing, but there's a principle here. I mean, gas and oil. The Nord Stream 2 is for gas, natural gas. The Keystone XL pipeline is for petroleum, oil from shale sands, tar sands. Tar sands, I think, is the more correct term. In Alberta, Canada, in the west, far west of Canada. These guys are doing everything they can to ruin all of these global energy markets, but they're indignant that OPEC is doing anything that might be in Russia's favor. Lo and behold, the Saudis have taken a handful of salt and rubbed it into the wound of the USA. They have added insult to injury. Somehow, I don't know all of the details. I'm going to find out from that man shortly. The Saudis are going to offer oil at a discount to Europe and at a premium to the USA. It's big stuff, guys. It's big stuff. It's a huge moral victory for OPEC and Russia. And a good birthday present. By the way, who knew? Nobody told me. October the 7th is Vladimir Putin's birthday. And today, he is 70 years old. So we discover. All right, another thing. Russia, big stuff. What is going on with the transport of material all across Russia? Yeah, we've been following this for a long time. Very diligently. And I can tell you that over the past week and a half, the movement of war material, arms and armor, in Russia has increased dramatically. I can't give you figures because the evidence is anecdotal, but it is persuasive. We are seeing across the internet far more videos and clips and commentaries and commentaries of ordinary citizens on this stuff like never before over the past 7 months. And interestingly, about 40% of that material is either explicitly ballistic missile, potentially nuclear missile related, or very high performance cruise missile related. So they're bringing out the big guns, apparently. Does it mean much? Maybe, maybe not. It certainly means that they're gearing up for the potential of serious conflict. On the note of nuclear missiles and big guns, the United States media is with frissons of excitement, with fervor and nervousness, reporting, as I say, excitedly, about the disappearance of the Belgorod submarine. Now, you may or may not be aware that submarines are designed and built to go under the water and therefore, for the most part, to vanish from most human eyes. But the Americans are treating this like something quite extraordinary. The Belgorod hasn't just gone and done what submarines do. No, it has disappeared, as if disappearing is quite an extraordinary thing for a submarine to do. Now, why the Belgorod? Excuse me, I've got a moustache hair going the wrong way and tickling my nose. I beg your pardon, everybody. The Belgorod is a very large submarine. It is a submarine with a mini sub and then one of those mini subs, you know, those deep submersible vehicles or whatever they're called. I'm not an expert. I'm going to have to do more research to speak more proficiently on this subject. However, I know enough to tell you that it is an extraordinarily large submarine that has 2 other submarines attached to it or enveloped within it. Moreover, the Belgorod carries the rapidly becoming infamous Poseidon nuclear-driven, nuclear-propelled torpedo containing also a nuclear warhead. And the Poseidon is able to travel not indefinitely, because eventually the uranium rods will become spent, the fuel rods will be used up. But it's able to circle the globe, and we're talking about the torpedo, not the submarine. The torpedo can go all around the globe, do whatever it likes for years. Or it can just sink gently to the bottom and rest on the sand again for years before being activated. And when it is activated, what it does is approach a coastline. I've described this before. And like a wave. Why do we have waves? Because there are pulses in the sea that are generated by the rotation of the earth and the gravity, the pull of the moon and all of this kind of stuff. The earth is dynamic. And those pulses, that energy, that is created in the sea sweeps in different directions. Eventually it must hit a shore. And the idea is that according to the slope of the submarine topography, so under the water, whether the slope is steep like this or it's shallow like that, dictates whether the wave comes in like in Hawaii. You've seen those guys surfing those big waves. That's because those islands are volcanic, and therefore parts of the islands, the coastline surrounding, the topography, the submarine topography is very radical. So those waves come in from, call it 1,000 miles away, and their energy is not dispersed by or absorbed by a shallow bottom. It hits this radical ascending slope, and boom! It's a big dramatic wave, and the surfers like to surf them, right? The idea is that the Belgorod releases the Poseidon atomic torpedo. It's a huge thing, huge, enormous. And this comes in and it explodes, thereby creating a tsunami right on the shoreline, or very close to the shoreline. I thought that the numbers were something like 190 meters, or I can't remember. But I gather now that they are more like a kilometer, these tsunamis, a kilometer high. Anyway, the Americans are in an absolute tiz over the disappearance of the Belgorod. It put to sea. She put to sea a few days ago and hasn't been seen. Right, and last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, for this week, the debt of the USA, the official American, the debt of the country, we would say, of the state. But it becomes confusing because Americans theoretically have 50 states, which is not the case at all, but let's not get into that. Yeah, I mean, when I say not the case at all, in theory, yes, it's the case, but in practice, not. They are not sovereign states in a loose confederal alliance or federal alliance. They're not friends, but sovereign of one another. They are one country, and those states have very little sovereignty to them. Anyway, the country's debt has gone to $31 trillion. Now, debt and GDP are not necessarily related. There is, I beg your pardon, the one does not necessarily influence the other. So I'm about to give you what many people would call a false comparison. However, it does have some value. Let's not get into the technicalities. Let it suffice to say that all of what the USA generates and creates, all of the value of that in a year, which is known as GDP, gross meaning biggest or big, gross domestic product. Domestic, the product of the USA, is about $23 trillion. It's a slightly disputed figure, but about $23 trillion. And their debt is $31 trillion. Now, a couple of days ago, I mentioned this on one of my WhatsApp groups, and I said to the guys, 8 weeks ago, I looked this up, and I have the sticky note next to me, and it was then 28,779 billion. That's what I said. 8 weeks ago it was 28 trillion, call it 29 trillion for the sake of a round number. But I wasn't telling the truth. In fact, in my mind, it was 2 weeks ago. But I thought, I must be losing my marbles. There's no way that they could have added $2 trillion in 2 weeks, or 3 or 4. And I got the figure from a very, very reliable and very famous website. But I thought, let's not create the impression that we're exaggerating. Let's err on the side of caution. So I told everybody it was 8 weeks, but I'm telling you that as far as I know, the figure being reported, 28,779 billion, was a figure from just a few weeks ago. Perhaps I have memory loss. Call it 4 weeks. Now, I'm not saying that they added $2 trillion worth of debt in 4 weeks. Let me offer this explanation. Perhaps what happened is that this very, very famous debt clock, very famous, very reliable, very highly thought of, was behind the times. Because of all the debt that has been created, this debt clock, the people running it, whoa, geez, these oaks are printing so much money we can't keep up. Maybe it was something like that. However, the fact remains that the USA now has a debt that is simply not repayable. Not in simple terms. It can be inflated away, and that's why part of the reason why we shall experience inflation crises in the world in the next period. But in simple terms, it can't be repaid. And it is likely to play a large role in a global financial crash. It won't be the entire cause, but it will play a large role in that. Joe Biden is printing money like Donald Trump. He might even end up exceeding Donald Trump, who didn't actually print, just added zeros on screens, literally. They don't even have the enough shame to compel themselves to print this stuff anymore. They just add it to screens. It's a completely theoretical thing. Backed by nothing. And Donald Trump did more of that in 4 years than any preceding president had ever done in 8 years, or any two presidents had done in any 2 4-year terms. Any 2 4-year terms, even if a president served 8, he didn't print as much as Donald Trump. But if you took his worst 4 years, if he served 8, and you took any other 4 years from any other president who served either 8 or 4 years, Donald Trump printed far more. I read something that claimed that he printed double what any other, as I've just described to you, 2 presidents, any 8-year period, had printed. But it looks as if Joe Biden is going to give him a run for his money. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to this very long video, almost 40 minutes. It has been wonderful to have you. If you are not a Suidlander and you appreciate our work, please consider supporting us. We need the support. We really need the financial support. If you'd like to make a donation, please see Suidlanders.org. Very easy, Suidlanders.org. Scroll to the bottom of the page, and there is a whole range of payment portals. Thank you very much, everybody. And I wish you a lovely, lovely weekend. And we'll 10 to 1, I believe, speak to you on Sunday. Bye-bye then. Cheerio.